this, that what the Beis Din says is, Beis Din says to Reuven, there's nothing to worry about. If you didn't do anything wrong, nothing bad is going to happen to you. That's how we go ahead and give chizuk ultimately again to Reuven. So we'll say, so just to understand what's happening over here, the Mishnah said that in a capital case, and this is just fascinating, and it tells you how reluctant a Beis Din is to put someone to death. So essentially, Beis Din out of the gate advocates on behalf of the defendant. That's what's happening over here. And so we're just trying to figure out how does that advocacy take form. So this last position of Abaye and Rava is essentially Beis Din says to Reuven. So again, just to understand how all of this gets started, right? Reuven walks into Beis Din, the witnesses come. What do the witnesses say? First order of business, right? We saw Reuven kill Shimon. That's what the witnesses are saying. At that moment, Rabbi and Rava says, Beis Din turns to Reuven and says, Reuven, if you didn't do anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Somehow, some way, the truth will come out, and you have nothing to worry about in these proceedings. Rav Ashi says, "Kol mi she'odea lo zechus, yavo v'yilamed alav." Beis Din makes an announcement, and what's the announcement? Beis Din says, whoever has a zechus, whoever has some type of support for Reuven, come forward. So Beis Din puts out the call for support to Reuven. Incredible. So Tanya Kavasi de Abaye v'Rava. The Brisa seems to support Abaye and Rava. What happened? So Gemara says, listen to this. Rebbe says, Im lo shachav ish osach ve'im lo satis. So what's this? Remember again, this is by the Sota. By the Sota. So what does the Torah say? The Kohen says to the Sota that if you did not commit adultery, you have nothing to worry about. So what do you see from here? Top of Lamed Gimel, 33a, Mikan sheposchin b'dinei nefashas tchila l'schos. You see from here that in capital cases, we really advocate on behalf of the defendant. So just like by Sota, the Kohen says to her, if you didn't do anything wrong, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. So too the Gemara uses this as a paradigm. In every capital case, halacha l'maisa, again, if you did nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. And Beis Din says this to the defendant as part of the proceedings. Incredible. Dinei mamanas machzirin. So we'll say, remember again, we saw in the Mishnah that by dinei mamanas, if it turns out that the din was adjudicated incorrectly, machzirin, we could go ahead and go back and essentially reverse it. Says Gemara, really, is that true or minhu? Or is a kasha? Donas hadin. If it Beis Din adjudicated the case, zika esachayiv, chiyev esazakai, time esatar, tir esatime, masha asa asui, v'yishani beiso. You know, we learned that Allah says that if Beis Din adjudicates a case and they make a mistake, How do they make a mistake? Again, they said the one who is chayiv is pater, the one who is pater is chayiv, tamei tar. They made a mistake. What happens when Beis Din makes a mistake? We don't reverse the ruling, but the judges become personally liable to make it up to the aggrieved, to the wronged party. So you see, it contradicts our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that you can reverse an erroneous ruling. Here, the Brisa says you can't reverse an erroneous ruling. What's going on over here? Am Rabbi Yosef lo kashya, kan b'mumcha, kan b'she'ena mumcha. So this is fascinating. One is talking about an expert judge, and one is talking about a non-expert judge. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Mumcha, second line from the top. Yesh bo koach lachzor, v'lo matzi l'meimar lei baldin ana, ki taima, Kama didacha vidna. So we're supposed to listen to this. In a case of an expert judge, if he made a mistake, so again, Beis Din has the right to reverse their ruling. Interestingly enough, in a non-expert judge, this is fascinating, Rashi points out, he doesn't have the ability to reverse his ruling. Why? Because since he's not an expert, who's to say that the reversal is any better than the first ruling? See, in an expert judge, he has the capacity and the ability to deliver a proper ruling. So if he makes a mistake, it's reversible. Non-expert judge, it's not reversible, because since there's a lack of expertise, who says the second one will be any better than the first one? Is that true? Is that true that by an expert judge we could reverse a ruling? V'hakatani, we learned, Im haya mumcha lebeis din pater mi l'shalem. Also, we learn that if somebody was a mumcha to Beis Din, right? Somebody was a mumcha, right? Pater mi l'shalem. Ultimately, again, they are exempt from going ahead and paying. So in other words, we'll say, so what this means is that if a mumcha goes ahead and makes a mistake, pater mi l'shalem means he's not personally liable. Now, the only time you would say that a judge is not personally liable is when? if they're not reversing the decision. Because again, otherwise, if a dayan Beis Din made a mistake, let them just go back and reverse the decision. The fact that the Brisa here says that a mumcha as part of the shalim seems to indicate to us that even a mumcha, even an expert, doesn't reverse their decision. Amra Machmin, no. Kan sheyesh gadol himena b'chachma b'minyan, kan shein gadol himena b'chachma b'minyan. One case is talking about, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over yesh gadol himenu osa gadol machzir devarav shalzeh. If there's a greater judge, so that greater judge has the ability to reverse the decision of the lesser judge. But if there's no greater judge, then ultimately again it remains irreversible. Incredible. So Rav Shesha says, Kan is very interesting. Kan, and we'll say this is going to be halacha l'maisa. Kan sheta b'dvar mishnah, kan sheta b'shikol hadas. Everything depends on the nature of the mistake which was made. If the judge made a mistake with what we call dvar mishnah, what's the dvar mishnah? Something that is explicit, right? So again, we'll say there's just such a concept of human error. So in human error, again, a judge can make a mistake. We're saying that as an explicit halacha. So if the judge makes a mistake, we're saying that as explicit halacha, that is a reversible mistake. Masha'en kain, if he makes a mistake with shikol hadas. What's shikol hadas? Something which requires, what's the right word? Opinion, right? Or analysis, which is not based on let's say, per se, what we call like halacha yevesha, just clear-cut halacha. There's a certain level of opinion. There's a certain level of analysis that has to go away. You have to weigh different things. So the Gemara is making this sort of sheshus is suggesting things like this. If a judge makes a mistake with just an explicit halacha, that judgment is reversible. If he makes a mistake with a shikol hadas, something that's more of an opinion that he has to weigh, that's not reversible. So the Gemara says, "Damar Rav Sheshes Amar Rav Asi, Tabed Var Mishnah Chozer." If a judge makes a mistake to the explicit halacha, it's reversible. Ta b'shikol hadas ino chozer. But if he makes a mistake with saying that is more of an opinion, then ultimately again it's not reversible. Amar le Ravina Rav Ashi, afilu ta b'Rabbi Chia v'Rabbi Oshia. Amar le'in. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi. So Ravina was trying to feel out what exactly is a good example of an explicit halacha. So for example, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, even if he made a mistake in the ruling of Rabbi Chia Rabbi Oshia, yeah, that would be an example of making a mistake with an explicit halacha. Afilu b'Rav Shmuel, even if it was a statement of Rav and Shmuel, yeah, that's also an example of an explicit halacha. Afilu b'Didi or b'Didach. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, even if someone makes a mistake in like our rulings, is that considered explicit halacha? To which Ravina responded, Atu anan katli kani ba'agma anan. What are we, reed cutters in a swamp? So essentially, the modern translation would be like, what do we, chop liver? Same idea. Like in other words, yeah, even we're also important. So therefore, our rulings are also considered to be explicit rulings. So we'll say, so essentially, definition of an explicit ruling is anything that is an explicit ruling. That's it. Written down, Torah Shevichsav, Torah Shebal Peh. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, Heichi dami shikol hadas. What's an example of an opinion? Right? Something that requires like a more opinion-based ruling. Amra Papa Kigon, Trei Tanoi, or Trei Amorai, de Pligi Ahadadi. A good example of this would be, let's say, Machlokes Tanoim, Machlokes Amoraim. Velo Itmar Hilchasa Lo Kimar, Velo Kimar. And again, we're talking about something where a definitive ruling was not delivered. Ve'ikri va'avad kechad minayu v'sugya d'shmaita azli ki'idach. And so we'll say, so what happened? So let's say shikol hadas would be in a situation where there's machlokes, and the truth is there's not a clear-cut halacha according to one. And then what happened? The dayan acted in accordance with one opinion, but conventional wisdom goes with the other opinion. So you can't call that an erroneous ruling. Now again, it turns out that it's against conventional opinion, but because there's not really a definitive ruling, the judge used his just logic, he used his analysis, so therefore again that's not a reversible decision. Incredible. So Rav Hamnuna is kasha to Rav Sheshes, so we're supposed to listen to this. So now, this is where Rav Sheshes is understanding this halacha, that if a judge makes a mistake with what we call a dvar mishnah, an explicit halacha, such a ruling is reversible. He makes a mistake with an opinion-based ruling, it's not reversible. Okay, so now Eisir Rav Hamnuna Rav Sheshes. So Rav Hamnuna is Kashat Rav Sheshes. Maise bePara Shal Beis Menachem Shenitla Ha'eim Shala Ve'Echid Rabbi Tarfon LeKlavim. We're supposed to listen to this. One time, somebody came to Rabbi Tarfon with a shaila about an animal. This animal had its uterus removed. The animal had the uterus removed. Rabbi Tarfon declared the animal was a treifa. Now remember again, when an animal is a treifa, you're not allowed to eat it. Even if it has proper shchita, you're still not allowed to eat it. So Rabbi Tarfon ruled that an animal that had uterus removed, ultimately again was a treifa, and therefore again it means he had it fed to the dogs. In other words, you can get benefit from it, you could try benefit from it, but you can't eat it. Okay? This case came before the Chum in Yavne, V'tirua, and the Chum said it's not a treifa. They disagreed with Rabbi Tarfon, right? They said it's not a treif at all. Sha'amar tudos harofe, because Todos, the doctor, said, Ein para v'chazira yotze mi'Alexandria shal Mitzrayim, ela im kein chotchin ha'im shalo kedei shalo teleid. So apparently, again, it was common practice in Alexandria that they would remove the uterus from the cow so that it shouldn't become pregnant. Right? And yet the animal is not a treifa. So they were citing medical knowledge that obviously an animal like this is not a treifa. So it turns out that Rabbi Tarfon ruled erroneously. Rabbi Tarfon says, Halcha chamarcha Tarfon. So essentially Rabbi Tarfon said, Tarfon, there goes your donkey. Now what that meant was Rabbi Tarfon thought that he was going to have to sell off his possessions in order to pay back the owner of the cow, right? Because remember again, by declaring the cow a treifa, he effectively deprived the owner of consuming that animal. That's a loss. So Tarfon said, Tarfon, there goes your donkey. You have to sell off your possessions in order to go ahead and pay back the wronged party. Rabbi Akiva says, no. Pachata. Akiva says, calm down, you're fine. Because anyone who's an expert judge, by definition, is pater from paying. So we'll say we're going to analyze this concept a little bit more, because essentially what there is like, essentially it's kind of like a little bit like a malpractice insurance, right? That halacha has to cover people when they make mistakes, because otherwise no one's ever going to want to do things for communal service, right? So if the dayan, so Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Tarfon, you're covered, you're fine, you don't have to pay anything. Because anyone who is an expert to the masses, ultimately, again, does not have to go ahead and pay back. So the Gemara says, fine. But one second. It's even easier. If Rabbi Tarfon really did make a mistake, and this is a mistake with an explicit halacha, let Rabbi Tarfon just go back and reverse the decision. In other words, this is reversible. So since it's reversible, let him just go back and say, I made a mistake, right? I made a mistake. That's all there is to say. So the Gemara says, Chada va'od kamar. Rabbi Akiva was telling Rabbi Tarfon two things. Chada, the Tabid Var Mishnah Ata, the Tabid Var Mishnah Choser. First of all, Rabbi Tarfon, calm down. Just reverse the decision. You're good to go. Just reverse it. This is reversible. Reverse it. You don't have to look for anything. Furthermore, va'od inami b'shikol hadas. Even if this was an opinion-based ruling, even in that case, right, and you made a mistake, first white line, you are an expert, you are a recognized expert, and therefore again you have like a professional liability coverage. You're fine. So one second. My kamosiv Rav Hamnuna Rav Sheshes mipara para hareachila leklavim velese detahadar. But I understand. What do you mean? That tell Rabbi Tarfon that he could go ahead and reverse his decision. Remember, what was Rabbi Tarfon's decision? What was his decision? Feed it to dogs, which means it's gone. It's gone, right? This isn't like a case of where, let's say, money exchanged hands, where you could reverse the decision. Bepashtos, if Rabbi Tarfon said, feed it to the dogs, as Rabbi say, by the way, if he's saying feed it to the dogs, what that also means was, it was shechted already. Right? Bepashtos, it was shechted already. So shechted already, fed it to the dogs, it's done. There's no reversal. To which the Gemara says, this is what it means to say. If you say that ultimately again, when you go ahead and even if you make a mistake, with the Dvar Mishnah, the ruling is not reversible. Alma kam dina. Therefore, again, the ruling stands. Hainu de kamaf Rabbi Tarfon. That's Rabbi Tarfon was upset. V'ka'amar le'ihum, and Rabbi Akiva comes and says to him, "Mumchela beizin ata v'ata patra milashalem." So Rabbi Tarfon, now it makes sense. In other words, if you hold that Tab Dvar Mishnah doesn't go back, doesn't reverse, then Rabbi Tarfon is all upset because he thinks he's going to be on the hook, right? And the Rabbi Akiva comes along and tells him, "Don't worry about it. You are a mumcha, and therefore, again, you have no personal liability." liability. However, but if you say that when a dayan makes a mistake in an explicit halacha, it is reversible, leimolei kevan deilu have para dinach lav dina v'lo klum avarata hashtanami lo klum avarata. Says if the cow was still here, your ruling would be reversible. So even if the cow is not here, technically speaking, you're not liable. Okay, so we'll say what comes out of here. So just to understand, this Rav Sheshes is incredibly important because this Rav Sheshes is what is going to go ahead and really guide much of our discussion going forward. Rav Sheshes' opinion is if a dayan makes a mistake with what we call a dvar mishnah, an explicit halacha, the ruling is reversible. If he makes a mistake with shikol hadas, an opinion, the ruling is not reversible. Okay, Rav Chisda gives another answer. Rav Chisda Amar kan shenatal v'nasan biyad, kan shelo natal v'nasan biyad. So what is interesting? Rav Chisda says, one case is talking about a situation where ultimately, again, the judge himself handed over money from one party to the other. When the judge himself handed over the money from one party to the other, the judgment is irreversible. When ultimately, again, the judge himself did not hand over the money from one party to the other. Rather, as Rashi says, elatziva labaldin v'asame atzmo. So again, if the judge just instructed one of the parties to hand over money to the other party, then that ruling is reversible. So it says the Gemara, Bishlama Chiyeves Hazakai. So again, in the case where it says he went ahead and he made the innocent party liable, that makes sense. Kigon Shenatal V'Nasan Biyad. So again, that would mean the dayan took money from one party and gave it over to the other. Elazika as a chayev heichin mishkachasla. But if he made the we'll call the guilty party innocent, where is there a transfer of money over there? Heichin mishkachasla. The Amarle Pater at Patrati, he said, "Your pater, I'vaha natal v'nasan biyad." But again, the judge himself is not moving anything from one party to the other. Kevan da'amar pater ata kimoshe natal v'nasan biyad dami. Since he says pater, it's as if he's moving money from one party to the other. Okay, elamasnisen diktani dine mamanis machzirin bein luschos bein lechova. I will say, but the Mishnah said that monetary cases are reversible, and they're reversible either way, right? It's reversible. Let's say that they ruled, the Beis Din ruled that the defendant is guilty. They could reverse it to say that he's innocent, and if he's innocent, they could reverse it to say that he's guilty. So the Gemara says, "Bishlama l'schos mishkachasla." So I understand ultimately, again, if you want to reverse it to the fact that he's innocent, that makes sense. In the beginning, Beis Din said that the defendant was guilty. V'lo natal, v'lo nasan biyad, and they didn't transfer any money over to him. Ela l'chova, heichem mishkachasla. But where do you ever see a reversal for liability purposes? The Amrlei pater ata, where we said the defendant is pater. Aiva amrit kevan Amrlei pater ata kimoshe natal v'nasan biyad dami. But we just said that once you say pater, pater is also the equivalent of moving money from one party to the other. To which the Gemara says chada katani. Dine mamanis machzir l'chus l'schus shi chova. So as I say, interestingly enough, dine mamanis, you could reverse a ruling in a case of ultimately again a schus that is also like a liability. The kavase gabi nefashas, because again correspondingly by capital cases machzirin l'schus amadeis ve'ein machzirin l'chova. You could reverse a judgment ultimately again to find the defendant innocent, but not to find him guilty. Machzirin l'schus. So ultimately, again, we could reverse it to schos, but only a schos. Ve'in machzir l'chova l'schos shu chova. So the Gemara says chova say demand. So when you say it's a liability, who is a liability for? Halo kashya chova say l'goel hadam. So this is interesting, Abosai. When you bring in a capital case, when you bring the defendant back, right, and you reverse the judgment. Originally, the Beis Din found him guilty, and ultimately now they're finding him innocent. So the Gemara says this is a reversal of judgment that is a schos, but also a chov. So I understand that it's a schos for the defendant, but who is it a chov for? The Goal Adam. I remember again, let's say in a case where Reuven killed Shimon, and now Beis Din is trying, the court case, witnesses came and tried to testify that Reuven killed Shimon intentionally. It turns out that Reuven only killed Shimon accidentally, right? So Lamaisa, again, now that'll be, or I should say, or Reuven didn't kill Shimon at all. So Halacha Lamaisa, again, that's a detriment for the Goal Adam, for the relative of Shimon. To which the Gemara says, I understand. Mishum chavase the goal adam katlina leilahai. So I understand because the goal adam is going to be inconvenienced. There's a havamina that we're not going to reverse the decision for Reuven, the defendant. Va'od my bain. Furthermore, again, the Mishnah used lashon of bain. So what's the distinction there? Kasha. You're right. This is a contradiction, or this is an outstanding kasha. Ravina says, "Kigon shahaya lo biadom mashkon v'not lo mimenum." Ravina says the case can be ultimately, again, where there was collateral, and the collateral was moved from one party to the other. The Gemara says, Timeas atar, the agibe sheretz. What's the case of Timeas atar? Where ultimately, again, a sheretz touched the tar item. Tiras atame she'irvan ben perosav. And the case of tiras atame can be ultimately, again, where the tame item was mixed in with other produce. Okay, so we'll say, what comes out of all this? So we'll say a number of very important things come out of this. So number one, the idea over here is this whole piece was all about the reversal of monetary law, right? So when Beis Din issues a monetary verdict, such a verdict is reversible. First of all, so the Mishnah tells us it's reversible either way. Whether Beis Din found the defendant guilty and now they're reversing it to innocent, or they found him innocent and reversing it to guilty, Beis Din always has the ability to reverse it. Now that's, pause there, that stands in contradistinction to capital cases. In capital cases, the only thing you could do is what? Change a guilty verdict to innocent. You can't, we'll see this in just a moment, you can't change innocent to guilty. But back to monetary law, under what circumstances can a Beis Din reverse its ruling? And the answer, I will say, the Rambam Shulchan Aruch Paskins is essentially in accordance with Rav Sheshas, that halacha l'maisa again, ta b'dvar mishnah is reversible, right? So again, Beis Din makes a mistake with an explicit ruling, halacha l'maisa, that is a reversible psak. But a Beis Din makes a mistake with what we call shikol hadas, an opinion-based idea, ultimately, again, that is not reversible. Now, the other piece that we also have to clarify, which we're not finished with yet, we're going to come back to it still, is this sugya about a mumcha versus an eno mumcha, right? Remember, again, expert judges versus not expert judges. Who has what we'll call like professional liability coverage, who doesn't have liability coverage, and how does shikol hadas and dvar mishnah fit in with those two? We still have to put those pieces together. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Dinei nefashos. Dinei nefashos. So remember again, the Gemara said that halacha l'maisa, so capital cases are not reversible. Right, you cannot go once a capital case. Once a Beis Din has ruled on a capital case, it's not reversible. Again, when is it not reversible? If they found the defendant innocent. If they found him innocent, they can't revisit it and give a guilty plea. But if there was a guilty verdict, they can reverse that to innocent. So Tanabana, let's analyze. Minayin liyosei Beis Din chayiv ve'echad omer yeshila meidalav schus minayin shemachzirin oso. So an interesting halacha over here. How do we know that if someone left Beis Din and they're chayiv, right? So someone went ahead and was found guilty in Beis Din, and then what happens? Now this is a capital case, and then someone comes along and says, "1 second, you found Reuven guilty of killing Shimon. I have a proof. I have something to benefit Reuven. I have something to benefit Reuven." How do we know? How do we know that we revisit the case and listen to the testimony again? Talmud Lomar, Noki al Tarog. So Pasuk says if someone's innocent, don't kill him. So therefore, again, if there's any grounds that the individual is innocent, we're going to rehear and re-listen to that case. What about the reverse case? How do I know that if someone was exonerated in Beis Din, and then again after the verdict was delivered, someone comes along and says, "But wait, I have incriminating evidence that Reuven did in fact commit the crime, the murder." How do we know that Beis Din does not listen to that individual? Talmud Lomar, Tzadik al Tarog. The pasuk says essentially, once someone's been found to be a tzaddik, ultimately again, do not go ahead and kill him. I will say, it's interesting, by the way. I'll just point out this lashon of tzaddik al tarog, right? That here, and listen how the Gemara is using it. The Gemara is using it that Allah again, Reuven was accused of killing Shimon, right? Then there's this whole din Torah. So it turns out that Reuven was exonerated. Okay, now what happens after he's exonerated? So someone else comes along and says, "I have incriminating testimony about Reuven." So what does Beis Din say? Not listening to you. Why? Because tzaddik al tarog. We'll say it's fascinating. Out of all the things that you would call Reuven, right? The one thing you probably wouldn't call him is what? Is a tzaddik. But what you see from here is something really incredible. That after a person goes through the process of, in this case, judgment, when they come out the other side of that, they're tzaddik. Right? In other words, when you go through the process, ultimately, again, of a reckoning of your deeds, and you come out of that, ultimately, again, the slate is clean. And it's not just true in a basin of basar v'adam, in a human court. This is also the way to look at tshuva also. A lot of times, the greatest challenge we have with tshuva is that even if I think that my tshuva is sincere, I feel that I emerge from the tshuva process tarnished. Right? So maybe I'm forgiven, right? Maybe if I get to the level that I believe that I'm forgiven, and I believe that I can get a second chance, and I believe that I can really start again, I don't believe that I'm actually starting with a clean slate. I feel that I'm tarnished. I'll tell you, we were at the new building late last night, getting everything set up. So it's so funny. I find myself telling people don't put your hands on the walls, right? Things don't stop. Move the chairs away a little bit. Because what happens when something is new and something is beautiful? First of all, every single scratch. I think that the millwork guy has blocked my number because last night I was going through all the furniture, showing this is Nick. He already told me Friday I'll come, I'll fix everything. But everything. So I say, because you know what happens? Sometimes when something is new, it's beautiful, it's pristine. But to be honest, we don't feel like we're new. And even when I do tshuva, I don't really feel new. I feel nicked and I feel tarnished and I feel damaged. Okay, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to kill me because of my averos. He's forgiven me that. But what the pasuk is saying is, tzaddik al tarog. After a person goes through their due process, what are they? Not simply innocent, but what? A tzaddik. Reuven had his day in court. The court found him innocent. Therefore, again, after he's innocent, he's a tzaddik. I engage in the process of tshuva. When I come out to that process, we'll say it's so important. When I come out of that process, it's not just the pshat that when I come out of tshuva, so that now I am not liable to punishment. I'm a tzaddik. And if we could think of ourselves as tzaddikim, when we come out on the other side of the tshuva process, then that gives us a whole new perspective on who and what we are, and a whole new perspective on what we could accomplish. When Reuven steps out of Beis Din and he's been exonerated, he's not simply innocent, he's a tzaddik. When I do real tshuva, I'm not just simply exonerated and free from liability and culpability, I am a tzaddik. And as a tzaddik, I could accomplish, I could be, and I can do whatever I want. I just have to make sure that I see myself through the right lens. It's so incredible. All right, Amram Sei Barashi, v'chilufa lemesis. Now, the one exception to this rule is a mesis. So we'll say, who's the mesis? The mesis is the guy who incites people to worship avodah zarah. Now, that's also a capital case. We saw this already earlier in the Masechta. That whereas normally in capital cases, we just saw Beis Din will advocate on behalf of the defendant. They absolutely will. In a case of avodah zarah, a mesis, someone who's on trial because he incited others to avodah zarah, Beis Din will not advocate on their behalf. Not only that, but again, I will say with a mesis, even if they found him innocent, and someone comes along and says, I have incriminating evidence, what do? They'll bring it back. They'll open up the Din Torah again. Incredible. Rav Kana Masni, Michi Harog Targenu. Again, so we'll say, so which makes sense by avodah zarah. By avodah zarah, there's just a different mindset with all of this. Such an individual just going to be dealt with in a separate kind of way. Rabbi Zerem Rav Sheshas, Chayve Galos Minayin. So we'll say it's actually an interesting case. What about Chayve Galos? Right? Let's say again, so also, what's Chayve Galus? Remember again, somebody killed someone b'shogeg. Reuven killed Shimon b'shogeg. And let's say, we'll both say, that's the case, where Reuven's on trial for killing b'shogeg. What happens now if they find him innocent, and then as he's leaving court, someone comes along and says, wait, I have incriminating evidence about Reuven. So do we open up the trial again? Asya, rotzeach. We make a gzera shav, rotzeach, it says rotzeach by Chayve Galus, rotzeach by a murder. Essentially, we treat a Galus case like a capital case. And therefore, again, once he's exonerated, we don't open it up again. Obviously, if he's been found liable, we will open it up again. Chayve Malchus. What if somebody's Chayve Malchus? So we'll say, Chayve Malchus could be anything, right? We're bringing Reuven to Beis Din because he ate a cheeseburger or whatever. He wore shatnez, Michal Shabbos, whatever. Right? Well, Shabbos is not a good example. But Chayve Malchus. So again, let's say Beis Din found him innocent. But after they found him innocent, now what happens? They want to go ahead and now someone comes with incriminating evidence. Asya Rasha. Ultimately, going to make a zir shava of Rasha, comparing it ultimately to Misa. A Malkus case is like a capital case also, which makes sense, right? Because Malkus, as much as Beis Din assesses someone how many Malkus they could take, but Lamaisa shares similarities with a capital case. So we'll say, which you see something is interesting. So Galus, any Galus case is going to be like a capital case. Malkus case is going to be like a capital case. So in all of these cases, if they find the defendant innocent, and then someone comes afterwards and says, I have incriminating evidence, we don't listen. Conversely, if they found them guilty and someone says, I have evidence to exonerate, we will open it up again. Taina Yaakov writes that supports this. Chayve galios minayin, asya rotseach, chayve malkios minayin, asya rasha. Okay, so we'll say, so therefore, Allah L'maisa, what comes out of here is as follows, that therefore, again, by all capital cases, if they find the defendant innocent, we don't revisit the case, even if someone else comes forward with other testimony, but if we found them guilty, we will revisit it. Malchus cases, lashes cases are just like capital cases. Galus cases just like capital cases as well. Next, so as we just said before, if the defendant was exonerated in a capital case, even if someone comes forward with other evidence, we simply do not accept it. Says the Gemara, Am Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Am Rabbi Yochanan, v'hu sheta b'davar she'nat stukin modin bo. So this is interesting. Now, when we say, by the way, that we do not revisit capital cases, that is assuming, by the way, that the Beis Din did not make like an explicit mistake. So, for example, the metric they use is that who are the tztukim? The tztukim were a sect that did not believe in Torah Shebal Peh. They didn't believe in the oral tradition. They just believe in Torah Shebechsav. So, which means, so if Beis Din made a mistake with something explicit, like even something that the tztukim would believe in, then that's a real error. That's real error, and that din is reversible. We'll see, for example, aval ta b'darshat tztukim modin bo zil kari beirav. But if the Beis Din made a mistake in saying that's like explicit in the Torah, just an explicit pasuk, right? So in other words, an act which is liable to death, right? And Beis Din made a mistake and they exonerated the guy, but they just made a mistake with an explicit halacha, that is reversible. That is reversible. Even though, again, we just said before that in capital cases, someone is exonerated, you cannot find them liable. But again, if the mistake was made with something explicit, that absolutely is reversible. Says the Gemara. So who boy mine Rabbi Chia Rabbi Yochanan ta b'noif v'no efes mau. So we'll say, so for example, let's say Ruvain is brought to Beis Din accused of committing adultery with Rachel, right? And what happens? Beis Din makes a mistake, and they find him innocent. They find them innocent, right? Because they thought adultery was mutter, right? Or whatever, they just made an explicit mistake in the case. So what's the halacha in such a case like that? So in other words, Reuven got off scot-free. But again, it's a mistake that even the tztukim would understand. Amar lei, this is a great phrase. Ad mukadach yakid zil kotz karach v'tzali. So the expression is like this: when your fire is burning, roast your gourds on it. It's much better in the Aramaic, right? But the idea is like, in other words, you already said the answer. In other words, the answer is explicit in front of you. What that means is if the fire is already burning, roast your gourds on it means the answer is already explicit right in front of your own eyes. And obviously, if the Beis Din is making an explicit mistake, and they said that adultery is mutter, when adultery is really aser, that's an explicit mistake. And even though Beis Din exonerated Ruvain, they're still going to go ahead and be able to reverse that particular decision. So the Gemara says as follows: Itmar nami Amrabi Ami Amrabi Yochanan ta benoif chozer. If Beis Din made a mistake about adultery and they paskin adultery was permitted, ultimately again, and therefore they exonerated Ruvain, such a ruling is reversible. Ela heichi dami ein chozrin. So what would be the example ultimately again? So we'll say, give me an example ultimately again of, let's say, a case where Beis Din made a mistake, exonerated someone, should not have exonerated them, right? Well, it would be a case where we would not reverse that ruling. Rabbi Yochanan kigon sheta shelo kidarka. I suppose there's an interesting case over here. Let's say again, Reuven committed adultery with Rachel, but he committed adultery with bia shelo kidarka. So bia shelo kidarka is aser, is still a form of adultery, right? Because the Torah uses lashon of mishkavei isha, which is plural, which means two forms of intercourse are prohibited. So let's say again, the Beis Din only thought that only natural intercourse ultimately again is punishable by death, but they thought that bia shelo kedarka is not adultery, so therefore they exonerated Ruvain. So we'll say, so that would be an example of a case where we would not reverse the decision. Why? Because that's not explicit. That's not explicit, right? In other words, that drasha, that bia shelo kedarka is treated like bia, that's a drasha. That's a drasha. So now again, if there was a natural act of bia and the Beis Din exonerated Ruvain, that's a reversible decision because even the tzdukim would agree with that. That's obvious. But again, in a more nuanced mistake, for example, they thought bia shelo kedarka is mutter. It's not written in the Torah. It's not written in the Torah. It's a drasha. It's a drasha. Such a mistake like that ultimately again would not be reversible. All right, we'll say we're going to. I apologize. I have a hakamas matzeva this morning, so we're going to stop over here just a few moments early. Let's say, shkoyach everyone, tremendous. We are here tomorrow morning still. So again, where you can leave your stuff. We're going to be here tomorrow morning, and then in Eretz Hashem, tomorrow we'll figure out what we're doing. Let's say, anyone who's here for the 9 o'clock minyan, 9 o'clock minyan is going to happen in rooms 2 and 3 in the base medrash. Shkoyach everyone. Shkoyach everyone Zoom.